You may be busy doing something while you listen to this podcast, but you're never too busy to eat healthy if you eat Vite Ramen. This podcast is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Show support for a sponsor that supports Moore's Law is Dead at the link in the description. And if you do, make sure you use offer code BROKENSILICON. And you can also support Moore's Law is Dead if you need Windows keys or software at cdkeyoffer.com. If you go there, also use the code BROKENSILICON for 25% off Windows keys or Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. All right, now let's get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by somebody who hasn't, well, actually, we just were talking about this before we went live. It was almost exactly 2 years ago that he was on before. Actually, that would make it 25 months, almost to the day of when this will be posted. And although you've been on before, that was, 25 months ago. So please introduce yourself, tell people what you do, why you do it. And I think with someone as long as their career is you, why you've done it for so long is actually the way I would ask the final question there. But please go on.
All right. I'm Josh Walrath. I'm one of the editors at PC Perspective. I've been talking about this stuff now for 26 years now. I think 1997 August, September was the first time I actually wrote anything. And it was on Josh's hardware page. And I think we probably talked about this ages ago. And it was before even GeoCities. It was bad. And I had crazy backgrounds and it was like MySpace before it was MySpace. It was terrible, but somehow I did it. And I then went on to penstarssys.com and hung my shingle out there for a while. I tried to do a combo review site and sell hardware. Eventually just turned into a review site. Mm-hmm. Hardware was not good to sell ever, really, unless you're Newegg. Mm-hmm. And even then, there's some issues. And then Ryan, in 2008, brought me on to PCPer. We went to an AMD function when they introduced the original Phenom. And the 3870 series was their high-end graphics card. And we started talking, and he's like, mind if I throw you some money on the side if you want to write a couple of articles a month? I was like, yeah, that sounds good, because I wasn't making jack all. So here I am.
It's funny because most people that I have on, like when I think about, friend of the channel who's been on numerous times, Steve and Tim from Hardware Unboxed, they've been doing this, for over a decade. Yeah. But it's interesting because someone like them, it's still kind of evolving. And then other people I have on, maybe they've been a YouTuber for 5 years or something. And then with you, though, it's been decades. And you're one of the few people, I think, and this was what was so great about the last time you were on, that I think you can actually remember not just the past decade or 2 decades ago, but like enough time that you can see the cycles more so than just 4-year cycles. Because I think a lot of people, especially when I see in the comments like these ideas like, well, you remember Pascal, and it's like, there was a whole world before Pascal and Polaris, and you can almost see. And that's what we talked about in 2021, how the cycle we were in then felt a lot more like the 90s, where technology all of a sudden, the blip that we saw between like 2012 to 2018, I don't call it like the 40 and 28 nanometer era, was like one where it was slowing down. And yeah, things were cheap, but we weren't getting the performance increases we used to be used to, but things got a lot cheaper. And it almost felt like through 2021 until now, things are getting better a lot faster like they used to, but they're also more expensive.
Yeah.
But there was this time in the 90s where PCs were $4,000. And remembering that, I think, is sometimes important. And remember, 4,000 before inflation. That was mid-range.
Yeah, and what was kind of amazing about that is that when Jensen Huang started really pushing, when he started to go with Riva 128 and then TNT and TNT2, he wanted to have a 6 months cadence between a lot of these major releases, and it's kind of crazy to think because that's incredibly fast. But back then, I mean, you're dealing with 2 million transistors. GeForce 3, when it came out at 60 million transistors or so, I mean, that blew everybody's hair back by how big that was. And and going back to when you were making the introductions, why did I stay in this for so long? It's because it's just constantly fascinating. It's so much fun to watch the creativity of these engineers and designers and the things that they do. And I mean, there's the comment, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And when you're talking about transistor design, I mean, that's really true. I mean, it's how do you assemble all these, sand particles into some working piece of silicon? And you can do it in so many ways. I mean, infinite ways. And some are better than others. But we've got, 3 groups right now that are doing at least graphics. 2 CPUs. Well,
more
3
than
CPUs.
3. And there's also Apple and ARM and
ARM's got their own. Apple has, but theirs is kind of derivative of some of the Mali stuff, from what I understand. But yeah, it's Qualcomm has the Adreno group. But yeah, I'm just talking kind of PC wise. It's just really neat to see, and it's great. As much as okay, so I'm an old time kind of pro AMD guy because I lived through the 90s where Intel did a lot of underhanded stuff. It was not pleasant. And AMD scrapped by, and there's Cyrix and Centaur and the Winchip guys, which was Centaur, and it was kind of neat to have that kind of competition. All just died away, and only AMD was left because they bought Next Gen, and the K6 was their life preserver. After all the litigation and all the cross licensing, and because AMD was originally a second source for Intel in the 80s for x86 processors, and they reverse engineered and did their own, and they consistently had kind of better processors than Intel did at that time. It was kind of fun to see. But then they did the K5. That was not fantastic. They had to, create the PR rating. And then the K6 was really competitive with the Pentium 2 in integer. Not great in floating point, which became a huge thing once, Quake and Quake 2 came out. But, that's ancient history. But you can kind of still see some parallels now. I mean, Nvidia is kind of strong arming the market because in AI they seeded a decade ago, and this is you cannot fault them for this. They seeded universities with hardware and all the software, and getting people on board with programming with CUDA, and it is paying off in spades. It's just crazy to see how I mean, Nvidia is growing. They're reaching Intel revenue numbers per quarter. It's nuts. So
and remember, Intel revenue without Intel overhead.
And then they still have overhead. They still got to pay for those chips. But when you're troubleshooting a problematic process node and throwing millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars into it, that's something that Nvidia doesn't have to do. They can just kind of plan around the schedules of TSMC and Samsung and whatever other partner that they're looking to have.
Well, so all right, Jeffrey Reyes writes in and he says, Josh, I really appreciate your in-depth discussions over the years on PCPer regarding any new NVIDIA GPU architecture that comes out. given your years of observations of NVIDIA's releases, do you get more excited over the advancements made at the architectural design level or the advancements gained by the latest semiconductor process technology? Also, would love to know what your favorite, maybe top 3 or 5 NVIDIA GPUs of all time are.
Gosh, that's a
Let's
lot.
leave it at 3 so that we
All
can.
right. Well, okay. The top NVIDIA GPUs. 6800 was the 6800 GT was a fantastic card. It got them back into the game after the really terrible FX series. It was no bueno. GeForce 2 Ultra was kind of fun. It was not a perfect card by any stretch of the imagination. And let me tell you, NVIDIA drivers back in the day, when it came to smoothness and frame delivery, was not good. There was so much micro stuttering in the old GeForce and their drivers, and they didn't fix that until quite a bit later. That was one thing that
I think they didn't really fix it till Kepler, if you ask me, and I think people forget that. Well, so we're on the subject of NVIDIA, which perfectly kind of pivots into one of the first things I wanted to talk about with you. When you came on 2 years ago, it was late 2021, so I don't know. We were probably talking about Alder Lake, and I did re-listen to parts of the podcast. But most of our discussion was really about Ampere and how there were a lot of people buying into some of the marketing NVIDIA put out, which was, I don't know what makes NVIDIA decide some of the things they say, but it seems to resonate with some people. So whoever works there knows what they're doing. But they said this is like the biggest leap in performance ever at NVIDIA. And I just immediately was scratching my head like Kepler, all these other and there were some times where they over doubled performance in like the 2000s and 90s. Like, what are you talking about? Biggest uplift. And me and you talked about that a lot in 2021, but it was a little too early to talk about Lovelace, where I think I had and some other people to confirm that was the code name. And there's probably some stuff I don't remember that was also leaked, but that was basically all we knew. But now you weren't on around the launch. Now we can talk about it because I really am curious. After talking with me so much about how Ampere's marketing said that it was the biggest uplift in history, and it wasn't. Now we have an uplift with Lovelace, where at least on paper, it is actually, I think, comparable to some of the older gens, where it's absolutely massive over Ampere. You have the 4090, which is quite cut down, outperforming the 3090 by 70% plus, and ray tracing over double often. And, if they ever made a 4090 Ti, I'm sure they'd double performance. And yet their marketing weren't happy enough to say doubling performance. They said 3 to 4x and tried to launch the 4080 12 gigabyte. Kind of just threw a lot of things at you. I'm just curious if it's interesting to you how much Lovelace actually is this massive uplift comparable to previous generations from decades ago. And also still, what do you think about that bizarre marketing where they argued this was 4 times better than last gen?
Well, it's marketing is marketing. And I mean, they sometimes, like anybody, I mean, they use like a spec view perf or a spec 2000 whatever, and these chips are aimed at that kind of stuff. And so as they've gone through the generations, they've added greater support for floating point 16, floating point 8, and 8, all these other data sets. And so then they start picking and choosing, and it's like, well, we have 4 times the performance in an FP8, even though previous generation wasn't able to split an FP16 into FP8 by 2. And so you got these huge inflated things that it's it's annoying, but it's marketing, and they can just point at graphs and say, see, I told you so. But when you're talking day-to-day stuff that you and I use, obviously you don't get that kind of bump, but we did see a pretty significant bump with the 4000 series. And I kind of wonder if it's part design and it's part process tech. If you notice, I mean, how much power they're able to shove into these chips, and I mean, they require a tremendous amount of cooling, but they're also running upwards of 95C. And this is both on CPU side and GPU side. And it seems like this generation of FinFET technology, it is a lot more resistant to kind of breaking down as the heat increases. You just apply more power, and stuff's not like electromigrating in the chip. Even at these high temperatures, and even though higher temperatures means you got to apply more power to it, they're still got these massive coolers that are taking a lot of that heat off. And it's just kind of really interesting because AMD is doing that with their 7000 series CPUs. I mean, they're running a 95C. Intel, with their latest 2 generations of chips, I mean, they're pulling a tremendous amount of power. They're producing
more energy than most graphics cards.
Yeah, and but they're not kind of breaking down like previous generations of CPUs that you would see. I mean, people would apply a tremendous amount of power to, like the first gen FinFET stuff from Intel, and I mean, it would just break it.
I remember Phenom 2 and Bulldozer. You didn't want to go over like 70C. Typically, or it'd become unstable. It wouldn't break necessarily, but it'd crash.
Yeah. So it's there's the engineering, process engineering, and design engineering. I mean, they are closer now than perhaps they've ever been. They have dedicated groups that Nvidia works, inside TSMC, and so even though they have their own little, Nvidia-based 4N process. It's just still essentially 5 nanometer, but they have groups in there and they've really tweaked it to their design. And this is something that's gone back, since the very beginning in the 70s, that you've got to have not only the design group, but also those engineers at the fabs who can help port things over. It's like physicists with a good idea and the actual engineers who implement this stuff. It's a hand-in-hand thing. In CPU and GPU and any ASIC design. And so it's fascinating where they've gone. I mean, we haven't seen the kind of performance jumps, raw performance in transistors. We've gone down in power consumption and we've increased the density, but we haven't seen, huge jumps in gigahertz. I mean, we were stuck at kind of 4 gigahertz for a while, and then, we went up to 5, and now
we were stuck at 4,
6.
right? Until AMD made Intel figure it out. Because I don't know if you remember around the Sandy Bridge through like Haswell era, there were multiple interviews I saw where like Intel engineers were like, oh, it's just so hard to get past 5 gigahertz. The second Zen comes out, they're launching 5.1, 5.2, then 6, now 6.2. With the i9 14900K soon, for KS soon. And it's like, no, it seems like you could have,
Yeah, it's there's a lot of black magic involved. I mean, it's almost alchemy when you're talking about process technology and mixing and matching things and how you deposition and what you etch and what you don't etch and etching has been made easier by EUV, so they don't have to have as many passes, quad patterning and stuff like that. But yeah, it's fascinating where we've gone. And then of course Jim Keller the other day said, Moore's law is not dying. It's we've got 1,000-fold increase from where we're doing it.
Well,
and, what he meant by that obviously is the dimensions of a current structure, a transistor structure, is still really, really big. It doesn't get anywhere close to that 5 nanometer. I mean, 5 nanometer is kind of the marketing term of the smallest feature that you can kind of measure on a transistor, because these transistors are still 100 nanometers by 100 nanometers in size, depending on what you're working with. And so you can still do a tremendous amount of stuff and shrinking with that. And so he's right in that we're not at the end, but I still think that Moore's law of doubling density every 18 months is that's hasn't been true for a while. It's just that they're doing.
But why do you think that is? Why do you think they are so? Because Jensen Huang's like, oh, it's dead, and he's not afraid to say it.
Yeah.
Like, why do we have to like flagellate ourselves at the religion of Moore's law when clearly just using chiplets or new forms
3D
of cooling,
stacking.
3D
'Cause
stacking.
They're talking
Like, this
density.
isn't Moore's law. So why do we have to keep bringing it up? That's actually why I started my channel, and I was actually going to bring this up, and I skipped ahead. Like, I am curious, like, both what you think about, like, why they obsess over it when, if we're being honest, the most successful companies are the ones that are moving past the idea of Moore's law. AMD with chiplets, Nvidia with, well, all this other stuff. They're kind of just spending their way out of the issue, frankly. But, you know, it's actually, I would also argue, much more interesting than it was in the 90s, where the only reason performance was going up is because they bought the newest node. That's not the case anymore. Like, every time. There's so many, well, as AMD put it, levers you can pull for performance now, that I'd actually argue it's more interesting to look at these architectures and talk about them, because they're not always getting from point A to point B in the same way.
Yeah,
But I guess I just asked you two different things. So
no, it's okay. Well, you know, and I can cover two different things. And so, okay, one, they always talk about Moore's law because I think that's primarily a shareholder thing.
Yeah,
is they like the shareholders like to hear is like, oh, we're staying on pace for this constant 18-month type growth of new products, you know, new revisions, stuff that is going to perform better at any given node or whatever, that we can count on that for 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of, like, you know, I like what AMD has been doing, and you know, the FPGA guys have been doing this as well before, but mixing and matching the nodes that make sense. So you want dense logic, use 5 nanometer node, and then here in the future 4 and 3. But SRAM size and these caches, they've just kind of stopped shrinking. They don't get that big bump for all the newer nodes, and so that's why they use this, you know, kind of size optimized, price optimized 6 nanometer product for their memory controller chiplets and L2 L3 cache, I guess, in their GPUs. And so, you know, that gives them a lot more flexibility, and they've done that before with, you know, obviously the IO chip. When the 3000 series of their CPUs came out, that adopted the you know, the bigger IO, and then the 2 smaller, you know, 7 nanometer CPU cores.
Well, and Intel split out the PCH from the CPU cores in the past too, and they still do every now and then, you know, to split the dies up.
Oh, and now I mean, this next generation is going to be all, you know, they developed the EMIB and other interconnect technologies, and then it's kind of amazing that AMD has been able to do what they did with just organic pin grid arrays and traces embedded in the organic material.
Well, so all right, let me steer this back though. So
steer it back.
When you see Nvidia announce like the 4 times performance thing, and then like the doubling performance with Ampere, and not to say they're the only one who does this, but this is what comes to mind, especially because this podcast will be coming out 1 year after Nvidia announced Lovelace. Like, do you, like, is that just whatever? They just announce 4 times the performance, they always do. And the reason I bring this up too is, and to be clear, I'm not saying this to defend AMD. I actually have my thoughts on why it may seem more insidious, but like, AMD overshoots their performance and just says up to 70, up to 80%, up to 80%. Turns out it's more like 40%, really at best. And they get a ton of flack for it. Meanwhile, Nvidia the whole time has been saying 4 times the performance. Is that just because Nvidia's figured out, you think, if we make it so crazy, it works as marketing, but the smart people know to ignore it? And the AMD seems close enough to reality that it seems like a lie? Or I guess I'm just wondering, like, at what point do we like look at some of this stuff and go, why isn't this something that's always pounced on right away? Like, why isn't every article starting with, this is absurd, it's not 4, like, why isn't every review starting with not 4 times the performance?
God, do you really want me to go into group psychology? Because I don't think that I have enough information here. It's
maybe, I don't know. That's kind of the in the weeds stuff we get into on this show sometimes.
No, you're right. It is bizarre. Is it just old time forums? It's social media? Is it's still, you know, some bitterness towards AMD, because let me tell you, back in the day, they've had some stinkers, and Bulldozer was certainly one that people were excited about. And I remember talking to some motherboard guys, and they're like, "Yeah, we develop boards for Bulldozer, and we've got the chips in." Oh yeah, how is it? It's slower than the previous gen.
Yeah.
Like, that's not good. And so, I mean,
That's crazy, by the way,
yeah,
that it was actually slower. I think, and that actually, I would like to bring that up too. Like I often see people say RDNA 3 is like Bulldozer, or there are some people before the reviews came out, they all backtracked on it, but they'll say Zen 4 is going to be like Bulldozer. And I don't think people understand like how bad Bulldozer was. Like RDNA 3 did increase efficiency, add new features and performance at same price points. By now, they tried to overcharge with one of them, but whatever. Same thing with so many other things. Like they actually do increase. Like Bulldozer went from 40 to 32 nanometer and was worse.
Yeah,
that's with a bigger die. That's crazy.
With the Phenom 2 6-core 1100T was a faster overall part than the fastest Bulldozer. Even though Bulldozer had 4 cores, 8 threads, this was a true 6-core processor Phenom 2. That
right. Well, so you think that's what it is, though? Like when I brought up that Nvidia question, and I do think this is a big part of it. Like, I think Nvidia at least is always going to bring at least that 30 to 45% increase. Sometimes they'll be higher, like with Ampere and Lovelace. And they're always going to. In fact, you could always say they almost hype it up to twice as good as it really is. Like Ampere's double the performance; it's 50% more. Lovelace is 4 times the performance; it's more like double. But it's a consistent overhyping. They always launch it every. It's funny you say Jensen wanted to do generations every 6 months. It seems like they just insist it's always every 2 years now.
No.
And but they always do it. Every 2 years, it does this. They overhype it consistently, so we know how to decode the hype. And AMD, sometimes they underhype it. Sometimes they say Zen 4 is going to have an 8% IPC increase. Now they just said 14%. And I don't understand what's going on with Zen 4's IPC. AMD keeps changing the number.
Yeah.
And then it just seems like AMD sometimes overhypes, sometimes underhypes, sometimes delivers. Well, and I think they always kind of deliver, but sometimes they don't deliver what they said. So do you think it's just the inconsistency? And there are some people that just take it, maybe in the press personally, that like, whoa, I thought it was going to be great, then it wasn't, and I felt stupid. Whereas with Nvidia, you always can kind of guess what's going to happen.
They're PR and marketing guys. They've been around for 20 years. They're old hats at this, and they kind of know what's going on and what people say. And I'm not trying to downplay their work, because they get the word out, and they get the word out really effectively. And there's a reason why Nvidia has 80% of the standalone GPU market.
Mm-hmm.
It's good engineering, and it always seems to perform well. And they've this last generation, I think that they, especially in the output features, they support HDMI 2.1, correct? But their DisplayPort port is still what, 1.4?
Perplexingly behind even Intel Alchemist, actually, I believe, which is just weird.
It's a little bizarre that they cut corners that you wouldn't always expect. They were, also.
And if I remember correctly, Maxwell got like a newer HDMI before anyone else did too, when AMD was behind with the 290X, despite AMD being the best at 4K. It's almost the same thing, but now with the Lovelace. That is weird.
Yeah, it's odd what they kind of pick and choose. It's not killing them right now, because very few people play on 8K monitors. And it's a little odd. Like when the 2000 series came out, that didn't even have PCIe 4.0, even though the rumor was the generation that AMD had at that same time, it had 4.0, but they just didn't enable it for power and and kind of what is that called?
You're thinking of the
they
Radeon
certify.
7, I think.
No, yeah, when they the Radeon 7, when they have to make certifications for running at that speed, it was just cheaper to run as a PCIe 3.0, even though they had that design in there, and then they got everything.
You know what the interesting thing is, though? It was like a year ago they launched. I don't know. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was a professional card based on TU 117. So that's the 1650 die. And it had 4.0. And I think they also released, and I could be misremembering this, so forgive me in the comments if I am, but I also think there was like an MX, I don't know, maybe 550, which is basically a cut down 1650, but it had PCIe 4.0 or something. And it's like, wait a second, so you're literally now launching Turing cards that are rebrands with 4.0, meaning they probably always could have with the entire Turing generation.
Yeah, I have.
Unless you tell me the 1650 die is the only one that had support for it, which sounds odd to me, but
Yeah. No, sometimes they spin out some more revs than. I mean, at
maybe.
least they say, it's some A3, whatever. But again, I'm going to go back in the day, ATI, like the X800 series, they had like seriously 5 or 6 different, concurrent different chips that were all under that kind of umbrella, and they had to make things different because they didn't have the AGP to PCI chip that Nvidia did, that you could just turn it around and it works that way. They had to have 2 different cards and a different connector, and it was just.
There's a 3000 series. There were some cards that had 2 variants, one for each connector, if I remember right. As late as that.
Yeah,
I don't know if it went to 4000 or not, but I know there were 3000.
Again, this is dusty history, and I've got old man brain, so I can't remember as well as you can anymore, which is sad.
Getting out and enjoying the weather, or is it too hot to get outside? Well, either way, whether you're looking for an easy meal on the go or something quick and delicious while you're cooped up inside, Vite Ramen has you covered. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy. Their classic packages make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, including new flavors like Radiant Crab Ryu. And also their Ramen Go packages offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break away from home. Or they even have other healthy products like Nano Boost Powder that makes any food at least a little healthy. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to save 10% on a variety of products, including special bundles for Moore's Law's Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes, and other food products, powders, cooking utensils, and more. They are a plucky, small, but rapidly growing company that has been good to Moore's Law's Dead for years. So, supporting them helps support me, and even just clicking on the link below makes a big difference for Moore's Law is Dead. But I really do like their products, and I recommend you try them as well. So check out Vite Ramen today. Really? Couldn't keep the glasses on for more than a minute?
Well, speaking of something that you probably can remember, though, you did tell me that you wanted to talk about the trajectory of the RX 7800 XT and 7700 XT. We're already kind of starting to talk about AMD a little bit here, so I thought maybe we jump into that. What do you want to discuss about it? Because I think you've seen some of my coverage. And then before we started recording, I double checked, as I always do. It still seems like the 7800 XT is basically selling out everywhere to this day. The 7700 XT, from what I can tell, is selling out in some places in Europe. Not all of them. It's selling, and in the US, it's not sold out on Newegg at all. But I have noticed it's selling fairly well at Micro Center at some places where, like, they used to say they had 30 of each, 25 plus of each model in stock. Now, most Micro Centers I check, it's like 3 to 5 of them. So they seem to be selling above average at Micro Center. But what that tells me is Micro Center always has crazy deals. So people will buy the 7700 XT in the US if something gives them that extra like $25 nudge. But no one wants to at 450 or higher. But again, just summarizing, both of them are still at least selling okay, and one of them's consistently selling out.
Yeah,
what did you want to go on?
We've got some bias here because, we pay attention to numbers. We understand some of the economics about it. And, we see the prices, we see the performance, and we see, power draw and all this other stuff. And, we kind of make cut and dried statements and we kind of, stick to that. The average person who's like, I'm going to go down and buy the 7800 XD at Micro Center. I'm going to drive hour and a half, 45 minutes, whatever. And I'm going to get there, and I'm going to be kind of sad. I'm going to be kind of sad that the 7800 XD is sold out. But you know what? 7700 XD is still pretty good. And
better than the 4060 Ti,
Yeah, and it's better than what I've got installed in my machine right now. Because let me tell you, back in the day, and again, this is the only thing my only shtick. I can remember crap somewhat well. I went to Best Buy to get a Voodoo 2 12 meg card because I wanted to be able to run it at, I think you could do, well, no, I wanted just to have the extra texture memory. So if you remember back in the day, they had, 4 meg of frame buffer and then 2 meg and 2 meg for each of the texture engines for the 8 meg card. And then it was 444 for the 12. And I wanted the 12, but they were sold out. But I could get an 8 meg for, I think it was $100 less at the time. And I was like, I don't want to do it, but I'm here. I might as well just buy it. And I was perfectly happy with it. I mean, the lesser texture memory really didn't impact my experience that much, just because each of them had 4 megs of frame buffer, so you could only do 800 by 600 at max anyway. But it was such a huge improvement over my Voodoo 1.
And you drove there anyways.
Yeah, I had to drive down to Fort Collins, 64 miles away from where I live. And
and a lot of people do drive long distance to Micro Centers too.
Oh, yeah, because it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, and I helped Steve at Hardware Unboxed, that 5600 X3D that he tested. Someone that I worked with, that I talked to at Micro Center, helped me get that for him quickly. And there are some places where they hide the deal. There are other places where they're happy to help you get more deals. And Micro Center, at least in my experience, is that. Like, I think it became 190 total for this 6-core Vcache CPU. We didn't have to tell them the deals. They were just like, hey, they knew what they could apply at the register without even being told. And I imagine, like, if you go to a Micro Center, not the same as Newegg. Go to a Micro Center, no 7800 XT in stock, 7700 XT in stock. I'm sure, and they do have sales reps are there, and they're like, I've got 2 coupons. We'll make this 400. And they're like, oh, I'll get it then. That's such an interesting point you're bringing up on why at some places and in some regions it's selling well and not in others. That's a pretty major factor, I'm sure, is why you see them selling out at Micro Center.
Yeah. And, going on to a tangent there, isn't it interesting that AMD offered Micro Center a unique SKU that not only was unique, but it performed right up there in games with the 5800 X3D. In fact, sometimes a little bit better because, there was more L3 cache per core than, the 5800 X3D had. So it's fascinating. I mean, they're obviously trying to butter up their friends, because I remember walking in earlier this summer, and I mean, it's just a huge wall of Nvidia cards, right? And then they've kind of got this smaller case of all the AMD Radeon stuff, and it's significant difference. I mean, the 7600 at that time was still selling well, and they were cheap at Micro Center. So I'm just kind of wondering if this isn't kind of a tactical move by AMD to try to get some more wall space from, what is now the major computer, brick and mortar reseller in the US. Yeah.
Well, and I guess I don't have any specifics, but a couple people at Micro Centers told me that are kind of like higher up at the company said more stuff's coming. Like AMD noticed that when they need to get rid of stock, move units, they just always seem to sell better at Micro Center. That unfortunately to the European listeners, it does sound like Micro Center is going to probably get some new exclusive stuff as well. So I think there's something going on here where AMD realizes like cultivating this relationship. Man, it seems to pay dividends every time they do it. And in fact, I'm sure they've also noticed, like when I talk to, whether it's people at Amazon, Newegg, Best Buy, man, Zen 4 is selling really well at Micro Center compared to Intel right now. For I think for numerous reasons. They do keep giving away RAM with it, to be fair. But like it seems like that's a place where AMD realizes there's just a lot of opportunity as well. Well, so going back to the 7800 XT and 7700 XT, you did specifically it sounded like you had more to say, though, about like what you expect out of the sales trajectory or success of those cards long term.
You know, they've done some interesting things in you know, a lot of people have applied it to as a negative that the 7700 and the 7800 are so close. But I'm kind of wondering if that a little bit isn't by thought.
If it's not really artificial or wholly it's not all arbitrary.
No, I think what it is we probably will not see as much of an erosion on the 7800 because the 7700 is going to be taking some of those hits.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, the 7800 is a great value, 7700 is a crap value, but then you start, you know,
relative to each other.
Yeah, and so you start taking the 7700 down, and it's like, you know, you've got this peg with the 7800 that just it's pegged, it's there, and then it's just all how people see it, and eventually, you know, when the 7700 is running at $399,
mm-hmm.
then they're gonna be like, oh, this is finally where it's supposed to be, and I feel comfortable buying the 77, but you know, still I'll get that 78 because it's $100 more. And I think that it's almost an anti-price erosion thing that AMD has done because their higher end product is going to stay at that $499 price, while the 7700, you know, the cut down that they originally offered at $449, they should have offered at $399.
Or at least $429. Just something.
Yeah. It's going to go down, and it makes the value of the 7800 just seem still very good, but
mm-hmm.
you're not mad at the 7700 anymore. It's just you know, it's again kind of psychology. Do you see where I'm kind of coming from in this? It's just, well,
and AMD actually said in an interview, I thought it was hilarious. Like Scott Herkelman in a recent interview gave a lot of just pretty honest answers where they were like, well, what do you think is going to happen with the 7700 XT price? And his answer was, well, we have a lot of innovative partners that will find ways to get it to the price they need it to be. And he basically just said, we know AIBs are going to put different coolers on this within a few months and make it $400. Like he all but said that.
Yeah.
But he didn't, what he left out is, and we're doing this so at launch, when we have the Starfield bundle, maybe a few more of them sell at the higher price.
Yeah. And that's actually some really solid thinking. And looking around, people have actually bought the same. It's not a bad card at all. It's just
bad. It's less value relative to the 7800 XT. Yeah. But if you it's Hardware and Box own numbers show this, like, it's the second best value card on the market after. So you're not getting a 4060 Ti instead of this thing. So that's probably what they told themselves is it's still if it wasn't for that other card, it'd still get good reviews.
Yeah, we're gonna paint this one with, you know, gold lacquer or whatever, I don't know, and get it up there and yeah, it may not sell initially very good, but there's going to be stock around, and people are, you know, like, especially in a physical location, 7800 is not there. I might as well get a 7700. I came all this way. What's the point?
Well, you know, this really kind of backfired though on the 7900 XT. It was a really interesting one because that one's cut down by 20% relative to the 7900 XTX. And I remember seeing that $900 and $1,000 price point and a lot of people thought this, like, this seems like they're trying to make the top one look good. Like, this is so weird. And it's actually cut down a lot. There's probably not going to be a lot of these cards on the market. But then when I asked people at AMD and I asked people in the supply chain, they're like, 80% of the initial stock is 7900 XT. So they actually think, and Hardware Unboxed actually said on record that AMD thought 900 was an aggressive price, and now they're 750. That really seems like it backfired, though. Like, what? It's 7700 selling well relative to it, and it sounds like you think that this is kind of a smart move. But would you say the 7900 XT was a smart move? That one really seemed like it should have been 800, even if you're trying to make the other one look good. And I'm just curious why now this may be smart, but before it was not, and what the difference is.
I think this is kind of the same situation. It's almost like they like the results of the throughput of the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT, and they applied that to the 7800 and the 7700. I mean, it's damn near identical, because the first thing when those cards came out, why would you buy this at $900 when you get so much more performance at $1,000? And it's the same thing. The $1,000 one sold out absolutely instantly. And I don't know, the numbers. What you say is probably true, but at the same time,
there was a lot of them. They never went out of stock, really.
Yeah,
I guess that's what we can agree,
XTs,
at least from public information.
Yeah. And so, but that XTX was always gone for months on end. And so it's almost like they're pumping up the top earner by putting the second one so damn close that the top one looks like such an incredibly good deal.
Well, I guess this, though, gets us into, but like, and you might have to just trust me when I say this, but when I talk to people, a lot of AMD's partners, their AIB partners, they're actually pretty mad at AMD about that. Like, they have a lot of 7900 XTs they can't get rid of. In fact, what I heard is the 7900 Golden Rabbit Edition, that was a way to just dump stock. You look at it, they're saving $20 on RAM and disabling 4 compute units. That's basically an artificial segmentation.
Yeah.
Like, they are that model is there so they could dump. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was like somewhere between 4 and 20,000 dies or something that they didn't even want to bother shipping out of China. That they were like, the reason it's in China is because they're like, we don't even want to bother shipping these. We're just going to cut them down by like a few percent and call it the Golden Rabbit Edition and just dump it into China for $650. So to me, that tells me there has to be some people at AMD who have to acknowledge that was a mistake, that even if you're going to make the other one look good, well, whatever, it still should have been $850, $800, because there are a lot of people that just, instead of, by the way, I've heard this, there were people that when the 7900 XTX was sold out at Micro Center, they said, screw that, I'll get the 4080 then. I'm not getting the XT. Like that. So I wonder, like, if you think AMD's like, well, it will work this time, and I think there are reasons this is a different situation than that one. But I'm just curious if you think there was more thought put in it than that, or they're just like, well, hopefully it will work this time.
Boy. I mean, I think it is working better at this time, but you're also dealing with, a $450 price point rather than $900. Just double that. Which
it might as well be $1,000 at that point.
Yeah,
a lot of people would probably argue.
So it's just, if you can afford a $900 video card, you can get $1,000. But if you're looking at $500, you're more limited. I mean, do I get a 4070 for $100 more than that? That actually,
or $150 more than the other 12 gigabyte 7700 XT.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting play. I don't entirely understand it. I mean, Herkelman likes to do the debated stuff, and so that may just maybe just it was a swing and a miss. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting because about 6 months ago. Was it 6 months ago? Maybe about 4. That I really noticed kind of an uptick of talk about the 7900 XT, just because it had dropped so low that it became.
At $750, I think it's a very good buy.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent buy. And but the thing is that nobody really wants to market it. very much. I mean, they've stopped sending out samples because, I mean, somebody come out with a review. It's like, okay, this has now dropped $150. It's right in the middle of kind of what is the new meat of the really enthusiast market. Why aren't we seeing a lot of these new reviews with, updated drivers and updated software? That
Hardware Unboxed did, but they're the only ones that I've noticed that have really done
nobody
this.
else is doing it. I mean, I've contacted some other people. And it's like, are you interested in exploring this? And it's just radio silence. It's like, do you really want to sell these cards? I mean, because right now it's at a spot where 20 gigs of memory. It's still got excellent raster performance.
It beats the 3090 Ti. I mean, it is not a weak card.
No, it is not. And I just don't always understand where, I think that a lot of the partners and Nvidia and AMD themselves were really, a lot of their internal metrics are all based on what they saw during the COVID years where everything was insane. And that has entirely skewed their perception away from the actual buying market. And I'm wondering if it's just some, there are a lot of smart people there and they understand this stuff. But I just wonder if there's some like bean counter metrics that they put in place and like, these need to hit these things.
Oh, and they're still following them, even though they've had like 10 data points to tell them no.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm kind of curious to see in the next year where that's going to go, because if I were to buy a new card today, the 7900 XT would be one of my tops, just because it's at a price where some people can afford, most people can. Well, okay,
you're far enough away from $1,000 where it's not $1,000.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I just didn't spend half my mortgage on freaking video card. So yeah, it's fascinating. I would love to listen in on some of these marketing and production meetings, and hear what they're saying and what their actual metrics are, and what are their goals? What do they really want to do? I mean, is it better for them to sell a bunch of 7800 XTs that are smaller GPU die, 2 less memory controller cache chips, and an easier way to bond all those together rather than the big GPU and 6? I don't know.
Well, so I think an interesting thing to point out too is, and I actually talked about this with Dan on the last live stream, a co-host of Broken Silicon news episodes. Like, the 7800 XT just is now the standard of value. Like, the 7900 XT, which I thought looked like a good deal at $750, it's, if we're being generous, 30% better than the 7800 XT in performance. Right, but it costs, well, $500, $550, $600, $650, $700. It's 50% more money at best usually now, and yet it's only 30% better. This kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the room. This one card that's just clearly better performance than per dollar than everything else around it. Do you think AMD is wise to just kind of let the chips keep falling where they may, or like you say, like they need to do some marketing? Like my and I'll just say it, my personal opinion is it's time to just go for it if they're ever going to. Like, you've seen Nvidia do pretty well here and there, but then fall flat with a lot of releases this year, and AMD's kind of stumbled around too. But now the 7800 XT is pretty much the first card since the 4090 that's actually selling well. And is it time for AMD to just do a new marketing blitz with new prices? Like, is it time to go from what their old MSRPs were to like 900, 700, 500, 450, and then maybe drop the 7600 to 250, and then ask reviewers to do re-reviews, send out samples again? Because my personal opinion is, hey, we're right about into the shopping season. Do it now. Drop the prices. You now know at 500, this level of performance sells like gangbusters. Adjust everything down to be at least close to in line with that, and you have Starfield. These things will fly off. This is your chance to try to take market share. Like, do you think they should do that, or just wait and hope everything makes a little more money?
Here's the big thing that has really muddied the waters. 6700 XT, which is $320. The 6800, which are now, I mean, they're pretty much all sold out at $400 though. But there's still 6800 XTs, 6900 XTs, and 6950 XTs, which are all price performance competitive with a lot of these cards. Yeah, 7900 XT has some advantages there. But boy, people look at those specials, and I mean they're starting to dry up. And perhaps once they do dry up, we will see a little bit more vigor on AMD side about marketing the 7900 XT, because it is a jump. Maybe they will be able to adjust the price more, but yeah, it's just that they had so much stock of these 6000 series in the closet that only now are we starting to see those things drop off, and it's good, but at the same time, it's about 6 months too late for them to have totally dropped that, but they would just have eaten a tremendous amount of money to just buy back those chips from partners or whatever. So I don't know. It
sounds like you think if they think they're through their old stock, then they should do this.
I think
they have to be through it.
Yeah, because that just people, they would just say, well, why don't you just get a 6900 XT? It's $100 cheaper, and it's still really fast, and it's got 16 gigs of memory, and it beats out a 3090 most of the time. So that's a big selling point. And when they were hitting $599 in specials, that's extremely hard to ignore, because that's a really solid product.
All right, so I actually, though, want to pivot into the NVIDIA side of this. ZaveBeat03 writes in and asks, last generation, NVIDIA didn't lower prices until the near of the end of the gen. Well, there are also shortages and a mining boom that made that happen. But he goes on, this time, as soon as AMD releases a competing card, the 7800 XT, NVIDIA lowered their prices on the 4060 Ti and the 4070. What's different this time? Why did they lower prices this time, twice in a row, the 4060 Ti and then the 4070? And why didn't they before? And I do think what I would point out is I think the 4080 is one of the worst price cards in history. They've refused to lower the price on it for a very long time now. I'm wondering if that's about to change. But why do you think, and I leaked this actually with two different videos. One of them, when AMD announced the 7700 XT, the 7800 XT, I was tipped off, hey, you're about to see a bunch of 4060 Ti 16 gigabytes hit 450, like clockwork. A week later, it happened, you know. And now I was told, not before it happened, but right when it was happening, by the same person at NVIDIA, hey, you may want to go look at 4070 pricing. And yeah, it's now 550. There are now multiple models that are 550. This is not an official price drop, but behind the scenes, look, there's the MSRP, and then there's, just for everyone listening, then there's the price partners actually buy the cards from NVIDIA for. Yeah. That's what's going on. And NVIDIA is charging their partners less. So why do you think they were willing to do this with two cards all of a sudden, but not with anything else this generation? Even though I think we both agree the 4080's price is ridiculous.
I just wonder if it isn't more about moving stock at those price points. Because again, very few people buy $1,200 video cards, even fewer buy $1,500 and $1,600 cards, even though I agree with you. 4090 is at least in line with performance and price with previous generations. And in fact, is kind of a better hit than like the 3090 originally. And then that's even before, the crypto inflated pricing that you got to see, because it does deliver. It is a monster card, pretty much across the board. I agree with you. The 4080 is just bunk. I mean, that's a terrible card at $1,100 to $1,200. You don't get a whole lot. It is far less. I mean, you think the 7700 to 7800 XT is a bad jump. No, it's the 7800. No, the 4080 is even worse.
It's 50% more than the 3080 with maybe 40% more performance. It's not good.
It's awful. And it's only got 16 gigs while, a $750 AMD card has 20. And then the other one is 24. And it's at the same price. And it's killing it in raster. The only thing that it doesn't is in ray tracing performance, especially, truly RTX adapted titles that, they don't always work real well on the AMD Radeon stuff, but does fine. But I just don't, I look at that and it's like, just why? And I think I did a die calculation with some of the numbers that we have available. And after processing, each of those 4080 chips are around $175 to $200 just bare. I mean, not the bare chip, but the process though. It's on its substrate. It's got the nice little glue around it and all the caps and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at max essentially a $200 part, and then you start figuring 16 gigs of memory.
Their boards, to be fair, they're putting ridiculously expensive coolers on them,
which that's probably the largest price of anything because they're getting
they're putting a 4090 cooler on a card that has almost half the die size. It's absolutely a waste. The thing never breaks 60 degrees. It's ridiculous. The coolers they put on that thing.
It's lovely from an end user, but if you're actually buying it, then it's terrible. And so, I think that they're just trying to move stuff at that lower end point, but they don't care about the $1,000. I mean, the $1,000 to $1,200. It's. I really wish I could see some of the numbers. I mean, is it 2% of the buying public? I mean, the person who buys a 1,500, is that 1%? But at the same time, if you're looking from 400 to 500, that probably encompasses 25% of the enthusiast market. And so I'm wondering if the partners rely on throughput of sell through, and they were never going to sell a whole lot of these 1,000 plus cards. You're going to get some of these really top end ones at 1,500 that will sell out, but how many are even on the marketplace? I mean, I think I heard numbers of 5,000 to 10,000 4090s at release worldwide, which is peanuts. That's.
Wait, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I thought it was in between 5,000 and 10,000 cards available at launch for the 4090.
No, that was the 3090. That's very close. 4090, I've heard they've sold 1 to 200,000 actually. That there was a lot of 4090s
at release or just in the past year.
Well, so it's interesting at release, and then what I've reported is that they have been throttling supply since then. But I do think that's because they are pivoting as much supply as possible towards AI cards, which I believe it's called the LS40. I brought this up several times without saying the name. I really should know the name of it if I'm going to keep bringing L40. AI card. And then if I go to the data sheet for its specs, let's see. 18,176 CUDA cores, 384-bit bus.
Sound familiar?
It's 8102. And so, but no one's really wants 4080 dies for AI work. They want 4090 dies.
They want the big fat.
Yeah. So, no, my understanding is they had a huge launch. Like, that really was a big one. That was really the only successful Lovelace launch with a lot of product. And the reason I think sales are also trailing down on that one is I think there's only so many people who are going to spend $1,600, even if it is a good deal. Yeah.
No, I certainly am not, and I am an enthusiast, but I just can't bring myself to do that. Even though I'd probably use it for 3 years, maybe 4 at this rate. It still is that's such a hard sell. But yeah, I think the AI colors Nvidia's monetization of how they're spending resources, because it's obviously exploding. And unlike crypto, which is a solution that's still looking for a problem, AI actually has usable technology. It's stuff that can be not only marketed but utilized. I mean, even the company
you can use it for ramming Teslas into ambulances.
You can do that. But
I will be honest, I'm a little skeptical of a lot of the AI stuff personally. I mean, obviously it's here to stay. I look at some of the stuff you can do with putting artists out of work, but and other stuff. And I'm going to be honest, there's a part of me that thinks it's actually pretty comparable to crypto in its current form.
Well, let me kind of open your eyes to something that is not the GPT, not the artwork, not stuff like that. So I work for an environmental statistics firm in my day job that I do a lot of sysadmin stuff for. And we have collected thousands of videos, tens of thousands of videos, pictures, data, points, everything. And you can only hire so many interns to go through this stuff. So, for example, we worked on a project with a northern migratory bird that we flew a drone over hundreds of miles of seashore, taking pictures and spotting these nests. And we had to, literally hire interns to go through frame by frame and pointing out what these nests are, and their accuracy is not always great.
Kind of like spy planes in the Cold War, just literally having thousands of secretaries look at pictures and then have other people look at them after them.
Exactly. And so what we have done is we've used machine learning and previous kind of marked up examples where it learns then from these marked up examples. It, does its kind of magic in there. And then it goes through everything really, really fast at like 99% accuracy versus an intern being 60% accurate. And we have years and years worth of data that we're still trying to get through and get good numbers off of. And in terms of machine learning, AI, and stuff like this is a godsend because it's better than humans and it can do it so much faster. And this is not just, like Chat GPT crap, which is impressive on its own right. But
some of it's useful already. It's just the issue I have with like everything you said. Yeah. And I know people using it for like mega scanning and the list goes on and on of these things you can use it for to go through data quickly. It is super useful for that. My question is, how much is it going to scale up in the next 3 years consistently and in a linear fashion? And how much is it you just solved the problem? You did it, You know what I wonder if you know what I mean by that. Like, because I see a lot of companies buying up these graphics cards, AI cards, and using them to hit the ground running, like build models, test things. And I can't help but think in a few years, they're not going to be using these cards anymore. What they're going to do is build their own custom silicon, just like Tesla did, just like, all these companies, Amazon's doing, where they use NVIDIA to train and get going. But then once they know what the problem is and how to solve it, they build their own custom silicon. That is something that I'm wondering, though. Like, how many of these cards being bought for that are being bought now to do that? And after that, they're going to use other things. Which, by the way, is what happened with Bitcoin. They stopped using graphics cards. They moved on to ASICs.
To custom stuff. It is not just a complex problem in terms of hardware, but is definitely that of software. And as we previously talked about, it's been over a decade that NVIDIA seeded CUDA into universities where these students would learn on this, they would understand it, and then they'd go on to jobs, and people would be like, "Well, we need to do this." Well, I learned it on CUDA. Okay, we can utilize that, and these guys have gone up the ranks, and they're using what they're comfortable with, which is all CUDA. And so there is a software side that is significant. Because the guys, the coders and whatnot that we bring into the company to do this machine learning, they use a CUDA framework because that's what they know. And to do it by themselves or to use some of these open products, they're just not sophisticated enough to get the results that they can get by using a CUDA framework. And so NVIDIA not only are great at actual design, and they've got thousands of years of experience with the current engineers, things that other guys have to, kind of build from scratch. And Amazon has spent a lot of money with their stuff. Google has spent a tremendous amount of money to try to catch up. And there's just institutional know-how that is not in place, that has been there for 30 years. They've seen these problems pop up again and again, and they know a lot of the solutions, even though we're talking about far more complex processors and process nodes. There are still just things in design flow that they know what pitfalls to avoid. And so, yeah, maybe eventually these guys will come up. But, Nvidia and AMD to a certain point, they're going to have an edge on these guys, just because this is what they do. They're not a home product shipping group that sells books and everything else, and they're also focusing on Amazon data. And I know I'm simplifying that way too much, because Amazon has built up their computational resources so much, and but there is a focus there that an AMD and Nvidia and Intel have that these other guys just do not yet, and it's hard to afford. And you kind of look at kind of the disappointment of the latest version of the Apple Silicon. I mean, they bought out PA Semi ages ago. They've brought in more people to work on these design groups, and initially they had really good success because they melded in, what is essentially a walled garden, that they controlled everything that they could, and they put in certain accelerators into their products, and they're like, this does X amount of stuff really, really well in these thermal and power things, because we control from the beginning to the end, and it's really super optimized for this. We work with Adobe and all these other groups to really focus on this, and it does very well. But the last couple of generations have not seen that initial kind of pop that some of their first products had, just because the market catches up. And also, I mean, you can only put in so many accelerators into any one chip and expect good general performance, because you're using up so much more of the silicon for these specialized accelerators. Does that make sense to you?
Well, no, on the Apple thing, it's funny. A couple of days ago, I guess by the time this comes out, it'll have been like 5 days ago, but on the last live stream, people asked about the A17 silicon and like, what's, do people misunderstand? Like, why is Apple's increase, only this much? Does this mean TSMC's not doing well? And I said, might I propose that AMD and Intel are better at making CPUs? Like, is this such a fucking crazy thing to say?
I mean, it's not like crazy.
Apple popped off when Intel was a basket case, and before AMD fully realized the Zen architecture, which they have now. And I think, then Apple hired Jim Keller and made, some really good stuff, and maybe they need to hire him again is the thing that I would argue. Although I have reasons for thinking it is a little more complex. I think they might actually not think making the CPU that much stronger this gen is as important as it is for AMD and Intel, where it has to be better, because it's not programmed to the metal, and it's not always firing as it's not as efficient at doing some things as it is in an Apple ecosystem, where they know Adobe is going to program it perfectly. That's my defense of Apple. My criticism is maybe they're not as good as AMD and Intel, and I don't think that's that crazy of a thing to suggest.
Oh, no.
Ever get exhausted looking for a safe way to pay reasonable pricing for Microsoft software amongst tons of questionable listings on eBay and shady websites? Well, now you don't have to do this any longer, not if you go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest AAA games, CDKeyOffer.com provides PC gamers with a product that I honestly think this community does need in a world where far too many of our components that make up our PCs are getting more expensive every year. The last thing we need is monopolistically priced software to remain on that list of stupid stuff we pay too much for. And you know, the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDKeyOffer.com for many years for a reason. They've been good to me. They've been good to Dan. They've been good to family members that use their website when they build a PC. And they've been good to the Moore's Law is Dead community as well. So whether you're looking for Steam, EA, Uplay, or PlayStation keys, or of course Microsoft products, support Moore's Law is Dead by using the code BROKENSILICON for 25% off all Microsoft products or Die Shrink for 3% off everything else. Support us at CDKeyOffer.com today. Well, steering the conversation, though, back to AI, wouldn't you say, though, like, you know, with this time it's real, right? Because people have been hyping up AI forever. That's for sure. I definitely think so. And I think, like, definitely the automated secretary, personal assistant use, that's going to be a thing. You know, kind of throwing ideas at the wall without making you waste all of your time. Obviously, filtering through data like you brought up, that's all going to be useful. But, you know, if you're betting on Nvidia and AI, wouldn't you say you're not, this is my argument at least, you're not really betting on them being this far ahead forever. You're betting they're also going to be first to the next thing. Because what they're doing right now is making general purpose graphics cards that are kind of really only useful for general AI stuff and training. Once you actually figure out the app, it's going to be other hardware that does it. And when people say the AI market's going to be whatever number gets you off, you know, like they'll just say, oh, it's $100 trillion market, you know, whatever they say it's going to become. Well, that market's not going to be built by Hopper. That market's going to be built by custom MI400 variants and all the stuff actually running the apps you build with Hopper. That's what they need a lot of. You know what I mean? They need Hopper to build the apps now. Once the apps need all the computing power, they're going to need the next thing. So I'd argue if you're betting on Nvidia, which I don't own stock in any of these companies, so I'm allowed to just be unbiasedly throwing out my idea. That's a decision I deliberately made. Like, you know, when you're really betting that Nvidia is going to be one step ahead, next step, not that this is the next step. They time Hopper's release perfectly.
Oh, it was.
You know.
This is seriously once in a generation type growth that they've experienced.
And MI300 is fantastic. It's just 6 months later than it should have been to really hit this boom, if we're being honest.
And again, software makes the world go round. And that is one thing that NVIDIA has that Intel, I mean, even Intel, who probably is one of the greatest compiler programming corporations in the world. I mean, their software is really, really good. I mean, yeah, you may have some problems with their Wi-Fi drivers and may not run Starfield great, but when you start looking at some of their tools that they provide their customers, I mean, it is top-notch stuff. And they don't have anything to compare with NVIDIA.
Which is why I think they're going to keep selling these AI things for at least the next year. It's not really because I'm sure they will dominate the market forever. It's because they're the only ones selling shovels in San Francisco in the 1800s. That's what's going on.
That is very apt, and I think that is serious. I mean, because AMD's been working on this stuff, but until 3 years ago, they just didn't have the budget to really hire on the amount of people they need to do the software development for a lot of their really professional stuff. They've relied on OpenCL, OpenGL, you know, Vulkan. You know, I mean, they provided that stuff to make Vulkan, you know, which was great and all. But just that the framework that CUDA gives you for getting an application off the ground and getting real results. Companies look at that. Time is money. And they do not want to reinvent the wheel when you've got a tool available and all you have to do is buy an NVIDIA graphics card.
Well, no, an L40, which is now an AI GPU.
Yeah, we don't use any of those. We use RTX 3090s and an RTX 4070s.
Oh,
because they've got enough memory space
for this exact thing you're using it for. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we're not, DG X1s or whatever the hell the latest things are. I mean, we're not willing to spend 150 grand on things that quite often break down. Do you remember Carmack saying weeks ago, "Oh yeah, I've had 2 of these damn things, and they've had to send them both in for service because they just died." He's not the only one, but their graphics cards are still, I mean, even from bad partners like Gigabyte, I mean, they're still lasting, and they're well worth the price of admission when you're actually doing work that you can build a client, and not only work that you can build clients, but accurate work. And if you also think about where we're sitting just right now, we have 2 things going on. One, we've got a good 40 years of digital data that we can go through and figure stuff out, and that all needs going over. Data that we have now and are moving in the future is higher quality data. I mean, more megapixels, more frames, more cameras out there, multiple views, stuff like that. And so you're not only just, doing the data, you're getting larger amounts of better quality data. And that makes a difference in when you're turning, you're processing this stuff. And so it's going to, I would say for the next 10 years, we're looking at just going through a backlog of stuff that we have sitting on hard drives, suffering bit rot that people are going to want to go over.
By the way, the 1800s and like World War I, like AI can add voice. Like there's a great documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old.
Yeah.
Where they used AI. They probably wish they would have waited till now so it looked better, but it still looked incredible when it came out. And they add voice and remaster and add color to World War I footage. And it's
it's a fantastic thing to watch.
It's incredible. It's like I actually showed it to my girlfriend and she was blown away. Like, oh my God, it's like we're in a time machine. I can actually see what this looked like. And before it just was unwatchable.
And we have 150 years worth of media like that we can address. With stuff like this, if they're willing. But again, it's scientific data. I mean, all the data is there. It's recorded. It probably needs to be transferred to some new kind of media. But it's just, thousands and thousands of man years, person years, or whatever, to go through this stuff that we just simply don't have. We don't have the workforce for. We don't have the expertise. And this is the killer application for AI. I mean, ChatGPT, real time, kind of Babelfish type stuff of translating languages. I mean, that's all great and it's going to be useful. But I mean, there's going to be, you're only going to get so good at that stuff before it's just magic, and you're going to be able to do it on your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're looking back at hundreds of years of data from tens of thousands of archives and sources, I mean, that's just, we will learn so much more about our world and where it's going. And then we're talking about using all that data and modeling even more complex stuff in the future. And that's just going to take that performance needs up another level year after year after year, because you have these massive data sets and you have more complex models and you need better compute to be able to figure out what in the hell they're trying to do. And so it's just, it is a solution that has found its problem.
Well, it's funny you say that though. And I agree that there are a lot of companies that are going to do that correctly. But it's not that I think there's an AI bubble because there aren't people that will do things usefully. Like you go back and look at the .com bubble and it's like, no one would say Google was a failure or any of this stuff. But if you go back and look at the .com bubble, unfortunately, so many of these useful companies crashed when the dumb ones did, just because actually it was funny when I used to trade stocks, there was this one green energy company that I made some money off of that I couldn't figure out why they weren't worth more. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, why did they crash this 1 year, 10 years ago? They've been smooth sailing for decades. And it was because Enron went down.
Oh.
And so then every green energy company took a hit. And so I thought they were undervalued. And but it's just, I don't know, a lot of people that trade stocks don't look at it that way. They're just like, well, because of pets.com, but Google. And unfortunately, that's how these markets work sometimes. And that's my concern with an AI bubble. Yeah. Not that all companies aren't doing useful stuff with it, but that a lot of companies will say, AI, the blockchain, I gotta buy, everything needs to use it, even though it's only really useful for
the Wyoming government is going to do a stable coin. And it's
called the US dollar. It's already digital.
Yeah.
But, like all of these things. And I think some companies are going to buy up a bunch of H100s and find out, we didn't need these, and that's where the crash comes from.
Well, not only that is that they have this pie in the sky vision, and they sold that to investors just like they did in 1997. Oh, you got a website? Yeah, I got a website. Oh, let me write this.
Then you're worth 10 times more. Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to be the same thing. It's like, well, we got this vision for this. I mean, this.
So that's my concern with the AI bubble.
So
right?
I mean, that you are absolutely correct. There's going to be corpses in the grass with AI, because there are going to be people who will overpromise, and again, pie in the sky type stuff that will not work. But because if you listen to any tech stock analyst thing, they will constantly say AI.
My washing machine has AI wash.
Yeah,
and me and my girlfriend laughed so hard. I mean,
it's awful.
It scans the weight. It works well. It's not AI, guys. Yeah. Oh, the funniest one. Tempur-Pedic has a new AI mattress.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, I think that you're correct. There is going to be a crash, and Nvidia will, lose revenue, just because there's going to be a lot of used hardware out there by companies who venture capitalists have thrown money at, and they've bought this stuff, and nothing useful has been ever thrown out. But I guess I'm just saying this from as a small company, a small developer
that is directly benefiting already.
It is absolutely, and it is a godsend to our work. I've told this one on the podcast. We set up 3 thermal cameras, 3 full spectrum cameras around a wind turbine. We have images saved to a large chunk of storage on the NAS, and we watch birds and bats getting hit by wind turbine blades. And the problem, the problem is we don't know how many, of these creatures are getting whacked. Because when they hit them, they're getting whacked, because the blade tips are moving 126 miles an hour. Yeah. There's
a lot of momentum behind that.
And
it's definitely going to win.
And but how we previously tried to find out, the ecological impact of this, we would have people, walk around, 100-yard by 100-yard grids looking for these dead animals, and their find rate was not great. I mean, stuff may be hidden under brush. Things could be somewhat decomposed, so it looks like, it's just a bunch of pebbles, when it's a bat who'd been laying there for a couple of weeks. We've improved that by getting field dogs who have, really good scent, and they will wander through and they can find these things at a higher rate. But the best thing is we've got all this video documentary and spectrum and infrared data of actually seeing these things. But the problem is, how do you figure out, what's an airplane flying around and then it goes out of screen? I mean, was this flying thing when a blade came around? Is it an animal? Is it a bird? And so AI and machine learning has gone through, and they run trainings on this data. And, they go through and they say, okay, because this stuff is just like 3 months worth. I mean, if you figure out how many frames per second we're doing over months, I mean, it's just an unimaginable amount of data. And this stuff can go through shreds of it in hours. And, I mean, real world stuff where you actually have a product that you're selling that relies on this. And not only is it a product, but your product is better because the data is good, but the analysis is at that 99 percentile range rather than you're lucky to be 50 with human beings. And that would, and because you just can't go through that much data as a person. You can't hire that many people. Well, I mean, the U.S. military can. But yeah,
right.
I mean,
That's
AI
the Cold War, but most people can't.
when you focus it down on a job like this, I mean, it's just the possibilities are endless, and I think that's what they're kind of, really marketing, because there is positive benefits. And I'm not trying to say that I'm a huge AI fanboy, because again, there are going to be some really moronic things that they're going to attach the words AI to, and it's just not going to work. And people are going to throw a lot of money at it.
Well, and without getting into it, because it's quite off subject, like, no, I'm actually a pretty big believer in like what Bitcoin can do. But so imagine how annoyed I am when I see the other ones. Like, but actually, I really want to ask this question, because I actually think, surprisingly, after talking to you now for a bit, I think you might actually have a different answer than me. Dylan K writes in and says, "Hello, Tom and Josh. As someone who's aware of the AI bubble, but ignorant about it ultimately, could you both provide a simple breakdown of what it could mean for the do-it-yourself market? What happens if the AI bubble grows and then eventually collapses? And I'm curious if you think it will benefit gamers at all if there is some collapse of the AI bubble at some point, because I'm actually surprised that you say, well, you have a bunch of 4070s sitting there. Like, would any AI collapse though really affect you selling them off?
Okay. We would not sell off any of our 4070s just because we have a product that actually utilizes them. It's not like we're going to kick all of our developers out because for some reason this data turns out bad. I mean, we do a lot of statistical analysis on everything that we're doing here, and we're finding a very, very high correspondence of the and accuracy of the job that we're doing. I mean, it's a simple job, but it's complex to implement and do it effectively and accurately. And that's the thing. But, when you're talking about, well, we're using AI to figure out what the best floral pattern of dresses that are going to be used next spring. I mean, that's just stupid stuff, because how are you going to, actually, really utilize that? And a lot of that is just almost sociological in how they're trying to represent AI, that it's this, overmind that they can tap into with this technology and be able to, go all Harry Seldon with. And I mean, the people who have an actual product that it works, they're going to be ecstatic if the bubble collapses, because there's going to be a lot more hardware available that we can do our jobs faster with. It's like the bubble of 98. Yeah, all of these companies went down, but we had a better understanding of what the internet was really capable of doing and how we could actually monetize it, and what is a good idea versus what is a bad. And so it's only going to grow. Again, I blockchain, Bitcoin, I understand.
But if you'll notice that they weren't using graphics cards for Bitcoin, that was all of these other ones, and then they did collapse. So I'm of two minds about this, because the answer I wrote down was, in the short term, I guess if it collapsed now, there probably would be a bunch of extra cards being sold off, because right now people are buying whatever they can get. But if the bubble continues for 10 years, they can't resell any of these AI products to gamers.
Okay, so there's two parts to that.
Yeah.
One is, a lot of these companies are not buying a tremendous amount of video cards to do their trainings.
That's what I suspect, right?
Okay,
so it's not like mine.
Us, it's we've got 5 or 6 cards across the company, and we've got 4 or 5 developers that are working on this, and we're getting money from DoD, DOE, a bunch of private companies, a bunch of wind turbine guys. But we're not buying these DGX ones. We're not doing these things because we can still do the work effectively on these limited amount of cards that we have, just because that's the way the workflow goes. If you suddenly throw $150,000 worth of stuff, we're not going to be more productive. It's just the way that we apply ML to this data and what we're getting out of it and what we're working on. Now, if we get 10 more developers, we would need more products, because they would each like to utilize one of them for their training sets by themselves and not have to share any resources. But it's just there is a manual component to this, that scaling out does not improve the data, and it doesn't really improve the time to market, just because of the way the workflow is happening. So we're not seeing, back a few years ago when we started doing this, and we really needed some 3090s to do some of this heavy duty work, because we had like a Titan XP, but it had 11 gigs of memory, or we
12,
had or 12 or whatever, or a we had a, what was it, what was one of the first ones we did, it's one of the AMD ones. It was a R9 290. It only had 4 gigs of memory.
And that had 4. They're the 390X at 8.
But that was way too limiting for a lot of these training sets. And so once we got to 12 and 24, it was able to loosen some things up, and because otherwise they had to like break a lot of this data up and multiple training sets and to fit into memory. It was just a pain in the ass. And so now that we got like 24 gig cards, that was fantastic. It really helped that out. But again, we just, we use consumer hardware, and we can use it really, really well. But I think that's where a lot of the AI development is actually happening. It's only when you look at, the Google and the Amazon, the guys that can afford these 150 or, buy $1.5 million worth of machines that they then throw in racks and try to throw people at. I don't know how effectively they're being used, because, the more you buy, the more you save. That only works if you actually have usable work going through them and going out to paying customers. In our case, our overhead in hardware is really, really low. We can afford this stuff, and we buy it as needed, and it does great work, but you don't need this huge blocks and racks worth of AI stuff for the stuff that's really, productive, it's handy, it's meaningful.
Because I just don't know how many of these companies buying up AI that don't need it are buying up gaming cards versus the stuff that can't be used for gaming. Because that's what would help gamers if there was a collapse in AI, is if, all of these used cards hit eBay, but you're not going to sell them. You're actually using them. And I suspect a lot of the companies buying them up in droves that have the money to do it might be buying H100s that are never going to be gaming cards. But I don't know. I don't know what percentage of those are gaming cards.
The company I work for, yearly, and I probably shouldn't be saying this. It's an $80 million a year company, and you'd think that they'd be able to afford really heavy duty stuff, but we don't need it for the work that we're doing. But we're doing super, super productive work that is getting a deliverable to clients that they like. The data is good. The machine learning has assisted us tremendously, but the machine learning, it's part of the product. It's not the product itself. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So that is where I think we're going to see.
But you see, that was an argument I made earlier too, is I don't think we actually need as many of these cards as Nvidia is hyping us up. And that is where I think this could be a bubble too.
And you know what? Don't get me wrong. If I was able to get my hands on an H100 for 5,000, or I don't know what do they go for? They're 40,000,
$30,000.
Yeah, if I can get one for 2,500 used, I will jump on it, because that would make an 8-hour training on one of these cards into about an hour, if even that.
But that is my overall conclusion, is I don't see the AI bubble as it goes up really benefiting gamers in terms of could benefit developers making games, but like it's not going to benefit the hardware pricing aspect in the way these other bubbles really have. And if it collapses, it's not the same type of a collapse.
No, I think
right.
I think
it's separate. You know,
yeah, it's nobody's going to be able to game on an H100, so it doesn't have DisplayPort, right?
Yeah. Well, so all right. KJM015 writes and says, "Hello, Tom and Josh. How far do you think Nvidia will go with the reallocation of game driver development to AI? At what point will the decrease in game driver staffing start to consistently impact?" Well, I'm gonna have to cut off that question, because like I got tipped off by one person in Nvidia, then another. They're not like laying off staff to support AI. It's just if they make whatever amount of money, all of the funding increases are going to AI right now, and the gamer side is kind of being told, well, we're not going to fire anybody, but this is your yearly budget still.
Yeah.
And I was heard that the people who worked on Starfield underestimated how much work it would take to get up and running. You know, it's a Bethesda Studios title, so I'm surprised they were surprised by the state at launch, but like that there was something there with they wish they would have had more developers to work on that software. But moving forward, well, Nvidia is an AI first company. It's not that they're divesting from gaming. It's just don't expect it to get as much of the pie moving forward.
Yeah. No, I think that's 100%. And not only that, but I mean, going back to the Starfield, I was told that Intel had builds for a long time. And I mean, they've got a lot of software people there anyway, but there's just so much work to be done. And so, yeah, Bethesda.
I'm curious how much long did Bethesda have it? Because I never could get anyone in that stuff. I don't know if I should say could, but I didn't have any information on the Intel aspect of that story, really. Like,
apparently they've had it for some 4 months.
So from what someone at Nvidia told me, half of the time when a game's being made, they will have touch-based meetings where they get to work on some of the code 8 months before launch. But 4 months isn't insane. So they did have it. That sounds about right, though. That sounds about right. My understanding, I don't know how much you saw my reporting on that, is that what happened with Starfield is it was originally written in Vulkan. It's quite a scoop. I got that finally. And that they needed AMD's help to make it work in DX12 when it became a Microsoft game, because it has to run on Xbox on DX12. Yeah. A lot of the original DLLs only worked on AMD. And so they had to translate this game. AMD helped them. It's not that AMD did anything malicious, but they certainly had a head start in making a broken game work. Yeah. And it sounds like Intel and Nvidia got it. It's that like 4 months before launch. And it's a matter of how seriously they took it and how hard it was to fix it for their hardware. And Nvidia handled it better than Intel, but Intel probably had a bigger mountain to climb.
Yeah,
because I don't know. You tell me if you disagree with that.
They how many problems have they fixed in the past 6 months? Intel side. I mean, how have they addressed DX11, DX9, improvements in DX12 and Vulkan? All of this stuff is. I mean, they have a large workload on their plate, and Starfield did not help out, even though they did have some early builds months in advance. They just you can only whip people for so long or make them work, crunch shifts constantly. And Intel's not going to do that.
Because on the Intel side, they're not just trying to fix Starfield; they're trying to fix 100 games.
Yeah, Yep. It is, and I mean that's why they're kind of so far behind, and it's why Nvidia is behind. And as you mentioned, if the Vulkan thing is correct, and it sounds like it is, Microsoft's going to require them to get to Xbox, and that's DX12. And who powers both major consoles? Yeah.
AMD. So
AMD.
who are you going to hire to help you on the game?
Yeah.
Obviously AMD, if that's the issue.
You're going to need their software engineers to be able to get it all working as it should.
Well, all right. You brought up Intel, so I'm going to pivot to this chunk of the script that I definitely want to at least touch on. It was funny, I went back and skimmed through the last time you were on, and a large chunk of it, it's late 2021. So a large chunk of our conversation was about Intel Arc. And it's funny, just to summarize our takes back then, I actually outlined them in bullet points. You, Josh, expected the smaller die to be about a $120 1660. Although you did, which unfortunately came up short. I expected that too, basically. And you expected the A770, or what became called that, to be a $300 3060 competitor. I heard that it was supposed to be a 3070 competitor. If you look at the die size, it definitely was supposed to be. Unfortunately, I would argue both fell short of that, at least at launch. They can show whatever charts they want. It lost to the 6600, let alone the 3060. Yeah. You expected a lot of driver issues, but for it to be okay. I expected worse drivers than AMD, but for it to be okay. And we both said, hey, if this thing doesn't launch by Q2, it's dead in the water. It's so funny because we were talking about this thing and we were like, yeah, hopefully it'll launch January. And the A770 ended up launching the same day as the 4090 in Q4 of that year. Yeah. How would you summarize Arc stacking up to your expectations?
In some ways, okay, one, timing wise, it was awful. I mean, they needed to get it out 6 months in advance of that with workable software. But I had heard that while the hardware was testing out okay, the software support was absolutely abysmal. And so there was a combination of getting everything all together, getting the parts, fully verified, but the software was holding it more back than anything else. They had to rewrite everything just because I think we'd talked about this before. There was some, 20 different graphics groups sprinkled around Intel, and they had some 30 different architectures that were unique among CPUs and mobile and other stuff at any one time. And so the software guys had to support that. It'd be like, one part would have this feature set and then another part would have a slightly different feature set. And so you have to compensate for it. And it was a nightmare. And then, one thing that Raja did is that he kind of got it all conglomerated together so they're on the same page. And a big part of that is just software. And so I was slightly more impressed with the actual hardware now that it has been optimized for, and the feature set that it has. I think it's great. It does great in RT. It does great in all of these productivity things that it's crap at launch, but now like the Puget Sound guys, they do pretty consistent testing with actual applications, not just games. And I mean, it has gone from leaps and bounds. It's a very compelling part. Sorry about my
That's fine.
phones. But it's probably a little bit more general performance than what we might want from a GPU. But no, it's overall I think it's surprisingly good. It's not great. It's not a world beater, but it's competent. Pretty much everything it does now that they have updated their software. And I think you picking up a 16 gig card for under $300, if you're willing to accept that you're not going to be able to run Starfield here for a couple of weeks,
would you accept that every other game you just can't play?
Well, I don't know.
I'm asking you, would you actually tell a friend to buy that?
So 6 months ago, I had that in a test machine, and I had my son and his friends just playing a bunch of different stuff, Valorant, League of Legends, a lot of the very, very popular games, and they all ran great on that. And so Intel is paying attention to that really popular stuff, but you're going to find these corner cases of stuff that's not as popular, doesn't have as big of a gamer base, and of course it's going to do poorly. And there are going to be some things that like Counter-Strike Go is going to do 400 frames per second on like a 6600 or something like that, and your Intel is only going to get 230. And of course, you're going to say, well, it's almost half the performance of this older card, but at the same time, are you going to miss those screen tears?
Well, but let me say this though:
Sure.
Battlefield 2042 basically doesn't work.
Yeah.
Halo basically doesn't work, and Starfield. Would you call Starfield, Halo, and Battlefield edge cases? Because this is my point. Would you actually tell a friend, "Hey, go spend the same price as a 6700 XT"?
Let me ask you one question: how many of your friends play Battlefield 2042?
A lot of them.
Really?
But actually, more than Halo. If you check Steam charts, it's outperforming Halo.
Okay, no, but your friends.
Oh yeah, my friends do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I still never even bought that, and so I'm looking at it through a different window, obviously, than you. But
I find that interesting because I see so many tech tubers benchmark Halo, and no one plays that. So you actually take the Steam charts, the new Halos, and it's because they haven't released any content for it since launch, which is crazy mismanagement. But that's neither here nor there, though. It was popular when it came out, though, and it still doesn't work on this Intel graphics card. And I understand they've come a long way, but it also has come a long way. AMD's pricing, which is now cheaper. So
a 6700 XT is a great all-around card with good amount of memory. The software is good, drivers are good. AMD is done. I mean, they're nearly up to that gold standard of what Nvidia has provided over the years. So yeah, it's a hard sell against a 6700, and so you've got to be. It's almost like a Linux user. Yeah, it's not going to work in all the things I want to do, but you know what? I can really dig into it, and it's an identity. It's a reason why it's selling at like 0.5% of the market. I mean, just from an academic point of view, I think it's a really interesting part. And they did a lot of things right. They got some things wrong, but I think they got more right than wrong. And it is giving them a good platform to do the software development that has really been needed at Intel for a long time to get all of their all their code base into one good bucket that they can apply to, their CPU graphics here in the future. I mean, that's something that it's so fractured in the past that maybe, this is just the growing pains to get it to where it needs to be. I don't know.
But so here's an interesting thing, though. Like, if you look at the 6700 XT, we're talking about 331 millimeters squared of 7 nanometer silicon.
I thought
that's being.
Okay, I'm sorry. Which one?
6700.
Okay, yeah.
And that's being sold for the same price as 400 millimeters squared of 6 nanometer silicon. Which, if you look, the numbers, you can just look at Intel's earnings. They are losing money on each one of these cards sold.
They are.
So how is this sustainable, though? No one recommends it, and I don't know. And in a world where Intel has no competition and they can burn money for a decade, I think, sure, but I don't know. I guess I'll just.
Second generation card is also unsustainable, then yes, it's unsustainable. But this is their first standalone graphics chip since the i740 back in 97, 98. And there is a lot that obviously goes into it in terms of software. And the world is much more complex in 2023 than it was in 1998. You had to worry about DX3, possible DX4 that coming up on the horizon. You had the AGP with the sideband addressing, and all the other technical components that was first to market with. It was kind of a crappy chip. It couldn't perform well against what 3DFX and Nvidia had, but they gave up on it way too soon, and they transferred all those people into like chipset graphics, and then eventually CPU, and it was again disjointed and all over the place, and it was the redheaded stepchild of Intel, but it was something they needed because they wanted to integrate graphics into chipsets and eventually CPUs, because somebody just buy a CPU from there for desktop use and they don't have to buy a graphics card. So,
well, but right now, but back then they had the money. That's the concern, right?
They've still got the money.
Do they though? Because it's every month they kill off 3DX points dead. They're dead.
Yeah.
They've gutted Raja gone. AXG gutted. I don't know that they do have the money. Like if you look at their margins and their earnings,
they're so beholden apparently to the shareholders that
they keep giving out those dividends. I think they can't afford to do anymore.
Yeah.
They've got to cut that first. Yeah. That's the thing they should have cut.
I mean, they could do whatever they want. I mean, again, they could burn money by the handful. But I think that there really does need to be a third player in the market with graphics. And Intel has so much software experience with their CPUs that they can port over to their graphics.
But can they? Because they haven't. Because it really hasn't panned out.
But they can. But it's again, they have some of the best compiler software on the planet. But
so if Battlemage was a mess, though, would you then say, all right, they can't? Because I said the same thing you did a year ago. They have to be able to build this software, but they didn't. So at what point do we go, we were wrong? They can't. They clearly can't.
Well, I think they can, but it's just what the bean counters and the top end at Intel decide to do. I mean, if they really put all their effort into it, there's no reason why it can't succeed. There's no reason why they
do
can't.
that though, or fund AI?
They can do both. They really. I mean, they
killed 3DX Point. I don't know that they can do both. They don't seem to have the money.
I don't. Again, it's not. I don't think it's about the money. I think there's some inner politics, and they have a certain threshold of pain that they're willing to take. And if it goes under that, they just cut it. Any other company would be like, hey, you know what? There's a future in this. We're going to take some of this pain. I think Intel is just like, it's the point of this point. It's just gone. That's kind of the culture. I mean, it's like, you hear about the employee reviews that they have yearly. If you're a manager of one of these groups, you have to give 50%, doing their job, 50% underperforming. And it doesn't matter if you've got a team of superstars, you still have to apply that to your people. It's just, it is a very rigid kind of system that they have in place that may not always make sense. And I'm wondering if these cuts that we're seeing, especially when AI is exploding and they're not gaining a huge amount of momentum, but they're still selling cards, and they're getting these drivers out, and they're getting that they still laid off software people who are directly involved.
I heard about that. Stuff. That was crazy to me.
Yeah, it's just, it is a interesting and a cutthroat culture at Intel. It's not always the best way of doing things, but because they were first and they were first successful, and I mean, they got just such a huge boost by IBM PC, and then later PC architectures where they were at the top, and a lot of people wanted to work for them because of their position. But they've lost so many people, and really important people too, just because I think that maybe the new guy is changing around the culture. He really should, because I think with the amount of competition is around, if you're cutting people who are not unproductive, that's only going to hurt your company.
Yeah, I've heard. But it's definitely not just the unproductive people, because some of the people I talk to at Intel for these leaks, like they'll fill me in and go, one of my friends, he or she just got, what is it? What do they call it? The people moving. There's some term they have that's crazy. That's basically called the employee mover.
Mhm.
And it's basically this like diagram of we're going to see who we can fire every month. And some of those people who have gone through this, and again, this is someone's friend. So what do they know? But they'll say, oh, no, here's a good example because it seemed like they're trying pretty hard to be unbiased. The person said, this person, they're both good friends, but one of them, honestly, not the best on their team. I think they could have left. The other person, though, this is one of the best engineers I know here, and yet this team still got gutted. So, like, there's worrisome stuff like that happening. And I guess what I'm trying to get to, though, here is like, here's my thing with Battlemage is like, we just talked about, like, they've improved the A770's drivers. It's gotten better since launch. I think you can really only go up from 0. But at a certain point, by the time it's fixed, I mean, we have AMD graphics cards that are still stronger for the same price.
Mhm.
So the question I have with Battlemage is if the market was still booming, sure, release whatever. It's going to sell. But I feel like we're in the opposite. And 2023 is almost over. Battlemage is not launching this year, at least from the data I've leaked. I don't think it's going to launch until the second half of next year. And I just had to, while you were talking to, I pulled this up, like, because I don't remember sometimes. So it's
I think you're absolutely correct that it's going to launch beginning second half of next year. From everything I've seen, initial stuff is in the labs. It takes about a year for that.
Right. So the earliest it could be ready is like
maybe June.
Hail Mary. Hail Mary. We're beginning Q3 or something. Yeah. What I've seen is they've actually gutted the top die, which if I'm being honest, what I think Intel should be doing is gutting everything they don't need so that they don't run out of money. Like launch something that works well. I think they bit off more than they could chew with Alchemist. There was no need for multiple products. Make one die, do it well, launch it on time. Don't try to launch all this stuff. And at least right now, what I'm seeing is the biggest thing they'll launch is this is a video.
Well, the A380 has sold.
I mean, look, none of them have sold very well. They were giving them away.
But of that, it was probably one of the best secondary cards on the market. I mean, if you're not doing 3D work, it was fantastic because it supported all of the latest display. It had the AV1 encoding. I mean, it was, for when that was first released, it was constantly sold out because it was such a good deal for what it was. But it's neither here nor there. Now there's a ton of them on there. You can buy one wherever you will. But that was an interesting first splash that Intel did because, it released a card that had all these interesting features. It was crap 3D performance, but it
lost to integrated graphics sometimes.
Oh
in my testing.
It was awful in that. But there were some other features that they implemented really well. It was one of the higher bought streaming cards for YouTubers and that, just because of what it was able to do really effectively and super cheaply that only these other streaming products were 3-4 times the price was able to do. But that was, again, that's a corner case because there are only so many streaming YouTubers and Twitchers in the world, though that number seems to be growing annoyingly. So
no, the where you make the money is if every laptop has a 3060. But with the highest die that I've seen, there was a bigger one they axed. The strongest one I'm seeing they might launch is a 256-bit 448 execution unit, 362 millimeter square die. So they're still they're going smaller than what they even have now. Mm-hmm. If you ask me, they should just launch that, axe all the other dies. Like there's no need to launch all this stuff that you can't support. But like, here's the problem though I have. So this is late next year. We're looking at a die size smaller than the 4080. So far, what happened with Alchemist is they had a die as big as a 3070 that performed almost like a 3050.
Yeah.
Now,
well,
it's more like a 3050 at launch. But does that matter if in a year from now there are $400 7800 XTs on the market? That's my argument, because it's like, this isn't going to be cheap to make.
No.
And I already think it would have trouble competing with what's on the market now. And AMD is using chiplets to make them cheaper. So this is the business case. It's like, do you think, and I looked this up too before we recorded, to really compete at $400, they need to double a 770 performance and somehow make it cheaper than a 7800 XT.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they're going to do that? Do you think they're going to be able to double performance from where they are now and on 4 nanometer, sell it for less than 400 without losing money per card? Because my answer is no.
No, they're not. And let me kind of, okay, this is, from my understanding, when this idea was brought forward, the experts in the room were saying it would be 3 to 4 generations of products and us building before we're truly competitive with the leader. Because, again, institutional knowledge, stuff that they have patented, ways of doing things that have been, honed for the past 30 years with these
They
companies.
know the unknown unknowns, we won't.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Exactly. And, I mean, the idea was we're not going to be truly competitive in this market until we get a 3rd or 4th generation product out where we really have it all down, not only on the hardware side, but the software side. We know the stuff in the A770, which is not useful, that we can jettison and regain die space for other things that are useful. We can figure out data pathways that are more effective, how to use caches, how to just do stuff in the real-time compiler to more effectively utilize the execution resources of these chips. And this is all a huge learning experience that they're trying to compress into 6 years that Nvidia has had since, working on since 1994. But I don't know if the top end brass will be willing to fund up to 4 generations. So we may only see up to Battlemage, and they may just cut it out because Battlemage is not going to be.
If I may jump in.
Sure.
Have you seen The Big Short?
Yes.
What you just said reminds me of this, with this one scene, which I bring up all the time because I think it's such a good way of like springing into a mentality that sounds smart. But there's a scene where one of the bankers goes, well, don't worry, we account for a downturn. And he goes, but this could be really bad. And the person smugly, arrogantly goes, well, we've accounted for like a 20% or even 30% drop in the market. So it could never be worse than that.
Yeah.
And then they go, yeah, we're thinking 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that can't happen because then we would go out of business. And to me, that is possibly what happened with the Intel AXG division, as they said, hey, it's going to take us 4 generations. And even if it costs twice as much as we expect, it couldn't possibly be worse than that. It was worse than that. We had a crypto. They missed the crypto boom.
Mm-hmm.
The market collapsed. It's impossible to launch competitive cards right now. Even AMD and Nvidia are struggling. It is financial suicide to launch into this market right now. And meanwhile, they missed the smartphone boom. They missed everything else. If they miss the AI boom, then they're just selling products to old customers, not hyperscalers and AI, the growing markets. And I just can't help but go, you bit off more than you can chew, and you plan for a 30% downturn. It's going to be a 60% Intel.
Mm-hmm.
But I probably jumped in too much there. But that mentality from The Big Short, that's what I think's going on.
But it's going back to 1998. They were asked to invest money in graphics, and they're like, the future's not that. Even Mark from Epic. No, sorry, Tim Sweeney from Epic says that eventually graphics are going to be, off to the side, and the CPUs are going to become so much more powerful that it's just going to be software rendering again. Well, he was kind of right.
That's funny
in ways, but he was totally wrong because it wasn't CPUs. It was graphics processors becoming more generalized and able to do, interesting shader work. And now, RTX and all of this. So Tim was wrong. Intel was wrong. If they had kept the Starfighter group that they had gotten from Lockheed Martin and invested even 10% more of what they were doing at that beginning, it would, 3DFX had dropped off, S3 dropped off. I mean, they could have had a lot of momentum and impetus that for graphics, and of course their software group is so stinking competent and good. I'm talking long-term type good, not just, well, they haven't fixed these drivers yet. Well, that is Sisyphus rolling that stone up the hill. They dropped the ball in 98, 99, and they have a chance to get into a market that is continuing to grow. And I'm not talking just AI. I'm talking about just compute, a different way of doing compute from a CPU that is really effective at many, many workloads that are not good on CPUs. And they just, like Ponte I mean, that's kind of a step in the right direction. Larrabee was an interesting step in that direction as well. But of course, it was just a massive failure because, again, they just didn't support it. And plus, they wanted to put x86 into everything. Here, we're going to do 50 x86 cores with a vector unit attached. Why?
We're going to have x86 smartphones.
Yeah, why are you doing that? I mean, it just is that whole culture. It's like, this is the thing we own, this is the thing we're really good at. We're going to try to spread it everywhere. And it's not effective everywhere. And this is their first really big jump into the unknown. And I think they should go and continue it because it is going to pay off. And it is going to keep them very, very relevant in a place where compute is increasingly needed because, again, not only the amount of data that we have, but the quality of the data that we are achieving, and we need more and more compute performance. And this is an excellent area.
But isn't that its own thing? Shouldn't they just do that then, not gaming?
Well, it's kind of part and parcel, just because they're two things that the performance needs are very, very similar. And so if you can sell tens of thousands of cards to gamers that will help support the graphics group to continue to develop and apply software to it, you can, again, like Nvidia is doing right now with the AI stuff, I mean, make a tremendous amount of money because this world is so compute hungry. It's not even funny. And we haven't even scratched the surface of what we're doing.
I mean, I just would come back to a third player in the market would be nice, but I just found it so fascinating. Like, and this keeps happening when I interview people. You said AMD and Nvidia's drivers are so great, though. Is Intel really competing? Or are they just making AMD look better? Are they making, because I couldn't help but notice after Alchemist came out, people said, man, AMD looks like a good value. And it's like, is that a third player? Is that someone juicing AMD's perception?
Yeah. No, I mean, AMD has its own share of software problems, but in the past 15 years, they have gone leaps and bounds from what they were, and they have invested heavily in that. And so, yeah, I mean, they're a close second to Nvidia, and they do some really good things. They may be a little bit slower off the bat and some other stuff, but no, I think that they're, again, it's the amount of years that they've been working on this, just the institutional knowledge of how the sausage is made. When you're dealing with software, that's handy, and you just have decades worth of code that you can fall back on and take a look at and see what worked and what didn't, and go from there. So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, one final thing I want to touch on, though, because speaking of AMD, is what they're likely to do next year, though. Swiggles writes in and says, hey, guys, do you think that the 7800 and 7700 are a sign from the future? just as Tom indicated that the pricing for Lovelace was incredibly high because, well, he's touching on a theory I have that the reason they're stubborn about 4080 pricing is once they move to 3 nanometer, they know the 5080 has to cost that much.
Mhm.
But that's what he's touching on there. But he then asked, do you think maybe AMD is seeing this fail and pivoting after realizing that the next generation they produce doesn't need to be high-end performance shattering products, and that people really do want more value-oriented purposeful. But so he's basically asking, do you think finally seeing AMD pivot to value with Navi 32 products, and also these rumors that they're canceling their top end for at least next gen, probably not forever, is a sign that they realize maybe we really should just be focusing on the mid-range moving forward, because that's what the market wants?
I don't know. I think this is so similar to the 5700 XT.
Yeah, these rumors, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, there was never a top end of that. It was the 5700 XT was it of that kind of generation. And I'm just wondering if this next generation is kind of taking some lessons from that. It's like, from what I've heard, they're having problems with in the back end of getting the high end processor GPU working effectively. Now, it could be just how they're implementing chiplets. Maybe it doesn't scale well beyond a certain amount of chips. I don't know.
Alchemist was supposed to be multi-die.
Really? I didn't know that.
The original design. The original design was multi-die. Battlemage was supposed to be too, but from what I've heard, that's canceled. There was one of my leaks from a very long time ago was like they had like 8 arc dies and it beat the 2080 Ti in 2019, but it used 1,000 watts. Like sending the data between the dies was a runaway power consumption problem that they still haven't solved. Yeah. So this does pop up. I will say, though, too, someone at AMD got mad when I suggested they were having issues with the top die. He said it's always just a matter of money. He was like, well, we wouldn't try to make something that we know won't work. But I don't know. I guess there's two sides to it. Two people at AMD may tell you different things, too, to be fair.
Yeah. And maybe it's just at the power and the complexity and the density that just a multi-die solution kind of breaks apart because we don't have the interconnect technology to make it really work well. I don't know.
But so I guess, I guess then the final question I'd have on that is just, what do you think if they did cancel the top end, let's call it the 8700 XT? Like, what do you think it needs to do to make people happy? Like, do you think if they launch something between 200 to 300 watts, that's between 7900 XT to 4090 performance, do you think that'll be enough to make people happy? Like, where does it need to be?
Do you really think that part will be that strong?
Well, Donald Kerner writes in, and he says, hey, Tom and Josh, what would you expect as a worst-case scenario for Navi 43 and Navi 44, performance-wise? Let's say the bug with RDNA 3, well, it's not one bug. There's always multiple. Isn't fixed, for example. Isn't fixed? Well, I mean, if it's not fixed, AMD's if they go from one gen to the next and they don't fix their mistakes in the other one, they will, I think, in 4.
Do you know what my gut feeling is about this?
Sure.
The theoretical 8700 XT, which would be the top end part of that Navi, would be in between the 7900 GRE and a 7900 XT. And that leaves.
Well, that's within the range I mentioned.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that then leaves.
I say that's the
7900 XTX that they could potentially juice up a little bit more. Because remember the old 7900 1 gigahertz edition?
Yeah, 7970 gigahertz. Yeah, that card was awesome.
Yeah. And so maybe we'll see something like that. I couldn't promise you, but I get the feeling that the 7900 XTX is going to be their top card for a while, even with the next generation coming, and that's kind of sad. But
it sounds
what
like you're kind of honestly though describing a 5700 XT situation because it didn't beat the Radeon 7. The Radeon 7 was stronger than it. Not much, but it was. The other one was a lot cheaper though. With so it sounds like that's what you basically expect.
It might just drive the 7800 XT to $400 and the 7700 XT to $300 after everything scales, and it's going to be a $500 to $550 card. Just because, that's technology. Maybe $600 max, and it'll drop the 7900 XTX down to $700. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like well, I mean, to actually answer Donald's question, what's the worst case scenario? I mean, look, this thing is 4 nanometer at least. So they are using a better node, not N4.
Yeah.
It will actually be at least 4 nanometer, if not 3. And we're talking about something, there was Navi 41, 42, 43, and 44. I don't see, especially in that interview I brought up with Scott Herkelman, he already said there's no point in making small cards anymore. And that's something I've heard people at Nvidia and AMD say is APUs are too strong. Well, okay, so what's a small card then? I mean, to me, that tells me if you're going to make 4 cards, they're on a new node, there's no point in making small cards anymore. Then I'd say there's no point in Navi 44 being smaller in die size than the 4060. Well, if that's the case, the 4070 is only 290 something millimeters squared, and that's not even 4 nanometer. So if AMD makes a 300 millimeter squared card on a better node, there's no reason. And remember, that's actually the 4070 Ti's die as well. I see no reason why they can't match the 7900 XT X with a 300 millimeter squared 4 nanometer card. Yeah. I think we just need to remember how much NVIDIA is charging for the 4080 that really has a mid-range die.
Yeah. It should be a $700 card at max. At max. It's small. And even at the pricing that per wafer of the N4 is, it just, Now I'm kind of curious what the actual, the next generation 4 nanometer, per wafer is going to be. It's probably going to be approaching $26,000 to $30,000 per wafer.
You mean for 3 nanometer?
Yeah, around that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
an advanced 4. I mean, I can't remember all of the stinking roadmaps that TSMC and Samsung is they're starting to become. They're really looking to push their technology, and they want to be more competitive.
Well, they should, based on the people I've talked to that worked with them. they should be. Their 5 nanometer shenanigans really pissed a lot of people off because they were like, "Look at our performance, and we beat TSMC," and then their yields were like 5%, and everyone was like, But that's what I would say is like if we're talking about a minimum, I mean, I don't think they're going to make. We have to remember they were going to have 41 and 42, which was supposed to be these crazy Ponte Vecchio things. So I don't think there's a point in making stuff that big and then also making 2 dies that are crazy weak. Like what's so they're making 3 dies that are weaker than last gen, even though this is like the biggest stuff.
Yeah, they need to focus on something to meet in the middle. Because you may be able to transfer some of that tech to the next generation Intel CPUs that have integrated graphics. But I mean, look what AMD has done. I mean, they've got 2 CU units on the 7000 series, and they actually do some interesting things. But they have a unified architecture. But Intel still kind of doesn't, and they're working on that. So. If they can, I mean, that would, again, it would make software development, which is like 50% of the work, so much easier.
Well, that's why I think Intel's got to like be smart and understand on the Intel side of this. Like, there is such a benefit to having dedicated cards that, and this was something someone told me too, is the big issue with Alchemist is Intel just can't accept they're not the best. Yeah. Like they're so used to being the best.
It's that culture, man.
Intel, you're not the best. Make a card that won't put you out of business so you don't have to kill it, is my opinion to them. But But on the AMD side, but again, answering Donald's question, it's like, well, we also know there's a PS5 Pro, which is supposedly around a 7900 XT in performance if you do the math. And it's like, well, so I don't think they're going to make a dedicated card that's weaker than that, is my argument. And I don't think there's a point in it because
I don't think
so
the Pro's
many
going to be quite that powerful either. But yeah, I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, no one thought the PS5 would be as strong as it was, though. But give it a couple years.
Both of them are very, very, very strong for what they are. But again, you don't have to put as much power into them as the cards that stand alone, because again, it's a walled garden for Xbox and PS5. You can do a lot of really interesting things low level and pass that on to developers.
Well, you can on the PS5. On the Xbox, they have to program it for DX12 anyways.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, not very well. No, I mean, there's still some things.
Hence why sometimes they have a efficiency issue. But, well, I guess the final thing I want to ask is really the main thing I brought you in for is just, kind of summing everything up here, looking back on a year of Alchemist and Lovelace being out. How, we kind of touched on both of them, but like, how are you feeling about this generation so far? And do you think the next, because every generation is basically 2 years long these days.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about how it's going so far? And do you think there's a turning point here where AMD stumbled out of the gate and can turn things around? Or do you think where things are is where things are kind of going to be for the next year, which is AMD's not doing bad. But the 7900 XTX sold well, 7800 XT selling well. It's been a mixed bag for them. Do you think there's going to be some aggression there where they pick up the momentum they're finally taking here? Do you think Nvidia is going to respond aggressively, or do you think it's going to be more of the same? Because I could see it going, if AMD actually tries, they can take this momentum and go with it. And Nvidia's focusing on AI deliberately. Nvidia's it's now no longer a matter of fact of like hoping Nvidia doesn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
They actually are focusing on other stuff for good business reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe AMD has an opening. Or do you think things are just going to continue the same way they always have?
Well, I think I kind of go back to the saying, making a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You can only do so much with what you got. These are chips that are billions and billions of transistors. They take years to develop. You have to buy specialized masks that cost $10 million. The cost of entry into any of this is insane. And so you have to really super focus on what you're doing and hope that what you're doing is the right answer for the market that you're getting to. And right now, Nvidia has kind of hit the jackpot in between a lot of those things, and they're making a lot of money. AMD is working with what they have, but again, they're not going to be able to make it to that top level with the products that they have. It just doesn't work that way with the way the industry is going, with how software is. And Intel is, they tried to be an everyman to features, performance, cost, and software. And it's such a hard thing to do. I think all of them. I don't know if any of them have any really true focused strategic decisions that they're doing. I think they're finding out what they're getting from the labs and trying to make the best of what they got, because they can't do redos. It would take years. And so what we're seeing is a really, really muddled response to the marketplace, where it used to be a little bit more fine point, where you could do respins in 6 months. You had, reasonable EDA software where you can actually make fixes and get things out, and you can hotlot stuff in 4 to 6 weeks and, get actually working things back in the lab. That's no longer the case. You have to have years in advance to get these, specialized quartz flawless masks that they use for EUV stuff that costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. So decisions that were made 5 years ago are what we are seeing being released to the market now. And some of the decisions were good, some were bad, and some were horrific. And you can only use what you've got available to address the marketplace and try to adjust them as much as possible, essentially just through software. And so, again, the products we're seeing now, they were spec'd out 5 years ago, and you can't see everything that's coming down. Who knew that, ray tracing would become as big of a buzz as it is? AMD was wholly unprepared. Intel was a little bit better because of the way they kind of architect things around. But this was, a thing that Nvidia pushed a long time ago, that they wanted to head to, and they were aggressive about it. But yeah, it just cost too much money to make any of these chips, to have them not be workable in some manner. And you've got to market what it can do well and hope that the money comes out, because it's nuts.
So do you think AMD tries another marketing push, pushes hard, and can build on the momentum? Or do you think what we're seeing now is it? Like, they've gained some momentum with the 7800 XT, but it's probably going to be about here. And if Nvidia wants to respond, they just can, and like wipe it out for another gen.
I don't know. It would make sense to me, especially with the momentum they got with the 7700 and 7800, to kind of repush that 79, maybe give it another $20 price drop and just, milk the hell out of it, and say, we've got comparable performance across X amount of things to, a $500 more expensive card with the 4080. I mean, they potentially could, because there are a lot of people with 3080s out here, and I'm one of them, would love to have an upgrade, but I can't stomach either of the things that are actually an upgrade to that in terms of price. And so, that might grab a couple of percent of the market of people who really want to upgrade, but they want the features, they want the performance, but they're just not willing to pay $1,100 to $1,200 for it.
It's funny. I think now I actually have, because I don't know. I asked you what you thought. I wasn't really sure what I thought, but I guess I actually do think I have an answer now. I think that what AMD needs to do, and my guess is they will know this answer. The people I've talked to, RDNA 4 isn't entirely fully defined. Like, they've canceled the top. They basically know what the others are, but there's still a little wiggle room before it comes out. Not much. I mean, you basically got to lock it all in pretty soon here.
Yeah.
But they're close enough to where they've got that wiggle room. And so I think in a month they will know what exactly is they're going to launch in a year. And they already basically know. But I think once they 100% know what they're going to launch, exactly where it can land, exactly what they can charge for it, they've got to take that and then adjust their product now to meet expectations.
Yeah.
So if RDNA 4 isn't great, I don't know, try not to lose too much money, AMD. But if RDNA 4 is a home run, let's remember, RDNA 3, they said this in interviews, it's supposed to be above 3 gigahertz, and it just uses too much energy. There's some issue there with the architecture. Like, if they can get RDNA 4 to be like a 3.2 gigahertz thing, that's a mid-range, like the 5700 XT, that's just a small chip that is high-end performance. If they can do that well, then I think what they've got to do is say, well, what are we going to charge for it in a year? And let's actually be decisive about this, not try to play 3D chess with everything we do. All right, let's say we want to charge $600 for that. All right, well, then what we're now going to do is move everything accordingly down.
Yeah.
Like the 7800 XT is fine. And then like maybe they won't admit the 4050s, the $450 7700 XTs had a price drop. Maybe they won't admit it. Maybe they'll just, surprisingly, now some AIBs are selling it for $400 all of a sudden for a holiday sale. They adjust everything down, set expectations, and then when a $500 787 or $600 8700 XT comes out with more performance, it's in line with a price performance increase over what they have now. I guess that's my answer is, if AMD thinks they have something next year, plan ahead this time and drop like this weird bamboozled launch you did, because they need to start doing that. All right, and it seems like I got my overall point in there at the end there before Josh's internet went out, but it sounded like you were agreeing with me on that before your internet went out, right?
I essentially am. I mean, it's just, you gotta work with what you got, and there's only so much that you're gonna be able to do. So how they market it, how they sell it, and hopefully if they make any kind of decent margins, then, that's going to be whether it's successful or not, whether they're going to be able to actually ship a decent amount of product or just have some kind of foothold into the marketplace with something that they're going to lose some money with. I don't know. But, they've got a lot of experience, and, they have a good baseline. We just got to trust that, things will work out in terms of design and manufacturing, that they can have a competitive part. But we don't know for sure. And that is obviously without saying.
Okay, well, I definitely wanted you to be able to do your plugs after coming on with me here for a few hours. So please tell people where they can find you and where they can find anything you want them to be able to find on the internet.
Well, I'm on that X thing, Twitter. I still call it Twitter, at Josh D. Walrath. I'm at PC Perspective. That's PCPer.com. Every Wednesday night, we record our podcast live. We have that link out in the option that you can see the rough and unedited version of the podcast, not the thing that Sebastian puts out, whether it's Friday or Saturday in a much more polished form. So you can check us out all that way if you would like. So appreciate you inviting me on. I really enjoyed. I could talk about this stuff for hours, and obviously I have.
Yeah,
sometimes ad nauseum. But really a lot of fun, and appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, and you as well. And I'm sure we'll find more hours to talk about all of this stuff in the future. And then, all of those links will be in the description as well. So I'll then just remind people, please, if you enjoyed this, subscribe to Moore's Law Dead on YouTube, ring the bell button, tell your friends about us. A third of you, or should I say 2/3 of you, supposedly watching Moore's Law Dead content aren't subscribed. It really does help when those numbers go up there. And so, give us a review on your podcast app of choice, and join the Patreon for all of that bonus content as well. Otherwise, thank you for listening while we talk for a few hours, and have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you.
I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, G Jits, Daniel D, Christopher Ricks, Aaron Close, Jan Renner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, Brian Riggleman, MJB1, Sam Miller, Deke, SNES Chalmers, Jerem Verrier, Valco Malev, Nicholas Buckner, Andrew S, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Gregory S. Acker, Sark Castro, Evan Dingle, Greg Wancha, Chris Rich, 3DS Boy 08, Halbuma, Hard4Room.com, Compressed Earth Blocks, Shredbird, Dr. Forbin, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jake223, Jake Martin, Holden Mobley, Slicky, Christopher A. Butler, Sammy Malas, Stefan Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Jordan Simkovic, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Danny and Deepest Learners, Stefan, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Crow, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Roger Davies, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, Cameron, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Shazier, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Chrysantine, The Eternal Dreamers, Neith, Razink, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMH, Colin Dards, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jed Sadler, Loophole 35, Windstar, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Pulse Media, Dave Schultz, Melodic Warrior, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, I7, 11700K, Joe Foot, Toka, Hardlin, /Boss C2, Jamie Whitworth, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, David Sebastian, Samuel Park, Earth Taurus, Keith Moore, Himsa Gun, Tails 2299, me, Vale Verga, Jean Sifos, Fenty CC, The Forbidden Juice, Per Leaksman, RB Racer, AC, Lord Starstream, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Freedy, Brian Wright, John Swin, Rodent, BC, Win Wang, Joe LaMarchina, Keekum, Albert Gunn, Solarized 80, Trevor Renfro, Yeti, Thalo 215, Matthew Marlowe, Raisin Biscuit, Jeff Johnson, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.